On a moment's notice, are you prepared to feed 5,000 men plus women and children? No? Can't afford it. That's what the disciples said. Look at that crowd. Only 12 of us. We've got 5 loaves, 2 fish, we've got a couple fish sandwiches worth. They hardly had enough for themselves. How in the world were they going to feed more than 5,000? Because it doesn't tell us how many women and children there were, right? Send them into town. Send them somewhere else. Let them go buy food for themselves. Sound like a plan? Good plan? We're not really sure about that one. You know it's a setup, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's a setup. These are the disciples. These are the people who spend day in, day out with Jesus, and they think the good plan for this huge crowd that is gathered in a deserted place is to send them back into the villages to buy dinner for themselves, because how in the world could these 12, with a little bit of bread and a little bit of fish, feed everybody? I mean, honestly, between us, how are we going to feed 5,000 people? Because the food's going to run out, right? We aren't made of money. I mean, I'm camping in the apartment, and I have bought a few staples, but I would be hard-pressed to feed as many people as in this room, let alone 5,000. What does Jesus think of that answer? Send them into town. What's he think of that plan? No? Oh, man. Jesus always gets me in trouble. Does that happen to you? All right. 5,000 people. It's late. They're all hungry. Jesus says, you feed them. I can imagine the disciples going, like, who's he talking to? Us? Is Jesus talking to us? Do we get off the hook saying, no, Jesus wasn't talking to us here at First Presbyterian Church in Springfield. Jesus was only talking to the disciples. You see, Jesus, being God incarnate, can bless loaves and fishes and feed a crowd of thousands. I mean, if God can create the whole universe, what's a little fish sandwich between, a few thousand of your closest friends? That should be easy, right? Snap your fingers, miracle sandwiches appear. That'd be handy, wouldn't it? Which committee in the church is responsible for the finger snapping? Who's in charge of that? Make it happen and it does. Anybody? So Jesus blessed it, but the disciples had the task of sharing it out with the thousands? Right? Who are the disciples today? We are? Oh. So what's our job? It must be an easy thing for God who creates the universe, for Jesus who calms the storms on the sea, who rises from the grave to make dinner. Right? That's easy. It's easy for him. We aren't Jesus. How in the world are we going to make that happen? We are people who struggle. We are people who fret. Some of us are champion warriors. You don't have to raise your hands. But just so you know, I am excellent at it. I am really quite talented at imagining all sorts of worst case scenarios, you know? Did some of you have that in common with me? Yeah. We struggle. We wrestle with God because we look at crowds of thousands and think, there is no way we can feed all those people. There is just no way. I love this story of Jacob wrestling. This feels like it's my story, and there's lots of time for me to share some of that with you. But I remember the first time I stood on the shore of the Jabbok River and imagined Jacob wrestling with this man, with this angel, with this divine presence, with God. And it seems like we often do a lot of wrestling. We will run from what God calls us to do because if you're anything like me, Jesus will get you in trouble too. People showed up to meet Jesus, and it got late, and they were hungry, and sending them away seemed like a really good idea, and Jesus says, what are you supposed to do? We have a table in front of us. We say these are the gifts of God for the people of God. And we're clear that the people in this room are not the only people of God, right? That we are invited. We are the guests that are invited to this table. We are the ones that are fed so that we can feed others. Once upon a time when I was a mission volunteer with the Presbyterian Church USA, doing inner city ministry in Macon, Georgia, which is a place with lots of hard edges between races, between classes, where folks struggle to recognize the face of God in one another. Someone gave me a book. I believe the title was Jesus Before Christianity. It's from Orbis Press. And the thing that I remember about this gospel story out of that book was the question of which was the bigger miracle. That the God of the universe made fish sandwiches, or that the crowd that gathered shared what they had and there was abundance left over. 12 baskets. A basket per disciple, a basket per tribe, more than we knew. I read an article this week about levels of generosity based on how much people had. Did you see this? It's research that reinforces other things that I've read. Do you know who the most generous people are, the people who give the most of what they have? Who? Folks who have the least. You know who gives the least of what they have? Those of us who have the most. We gather on that hillside to listen to what Jesus says. And he says, feed them. Feed each other. I don't have any fish in my pockets. You'll be glad to know. But we all have something to share. Every single one of us has something to share, and every one of us needs what the other has to offer. And at this table, we share the gifts of God for the people of God, not because they're ours to share, but because they are the gifts we've received. And we will continue to struggle, and we may walk away limping with a new name and a blessing to feed one another, as disciples are charged to do. for the challenge, for the struggle, for the opportunity to share the gifts of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.